behalf of the Jam organizers, 7 Days in the Tech Alliance, I'd like to welcome you to the B2B. This is going to be the startups and how do you find the money. So fascinating topic. It's going to be moderated by Patrick. So Patrick, take it away for us.
Thanks. So we have a great lineup here for you guys. I'm pretty excited to be on stage with these gentlemen. They've definitely some leaders in the startup community here in Vermont. So I'm going to tee things off a bit by kind of providing some context, and then I'm going to give most of the time to the rest of the panelists. But just to give you an idea of where we're kind of coming from, the idea here was to kind of provide a forum to talk about two main funding sources that are available in Vermont. You know, there's many different ones to choose from. We only have an hour, so we kind of picked two. So the first one is SBIR STTR, which is Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Tech Transfer, and then the second would be the venture capital community. So I'll get started first by kind of explaining this weird acronym that's after my name, EPSCoR. It stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research, and it's a National Science Foundation funded program. There's actually 32 of us across the country in various states and territories, and the main goal is to improve research capacity and competitiveness. So states that don't get a lot of research funding, they get an EPSCoR program to kind of encourage that state and build infrastructure in the area of research and development. So one of the ways we do that, outside of a large grant at the University of Vermont and some human resource type things and workforce development, is private sector outreach. And one of the main ways that we've been doing that is with some seed grants for SBIR and STTR applicants. So first I'll talk about federal SBIR, federal STTR, and then kind of how we fit in to kind of give you an idea of what these programs are if you haven't heard of them before. So first, SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research. So the main kind of requirement for this one is that the principal investigator or the applicant needs to be 50% employed by the company that they're applying under. So it needs to be their main source of the main effort during the course of a week. And agencies that spend $100 million or more are required to have one of these SBIR programs. And these SBIR programs take up about 2.8% of their total research spending, and that's mandated by Congress. So so if you look at how many agencies spend $100 million or more, that's 12 agencies, the biggest of which being DoD, but some of the significant ones are NIH, National Institutes of Health, and Department of Energy, NASA, and the National Science Foundation. So SBIR, when you apply at the federal level, goes through three main phases, called kind of 2.5. Phase one is the first one, and that's for the basic research of your innovation idea. That usually maxes out at $150,000 for about 6 months. After you finish your phase one, you're eligible to go into phase two, which is kind of a more commercialization business phase. And that was maxed out at $1 million over 2 years. Some agencies that might be interested in buying your product, like DoD or NASA or DOE, they offer phase threes that kind of work from the prototype and the kind of the final product stage into commercialization or mass production. So STTR, the Tech Transfer Program, is similar to SBIR except that you don't need to work 50%. The requirement for STTR is that you work with a university. And the way the percentages roll out is that at least 40% of the R&D need to be done by the small business interests, and 30% needs to be done at least by the university partner. And so federal agencies that spend at least $1 billion are required to have an STTR program, and that comes out to about 5 different agencies. Their phases are similar, phase 1, 2, and 3, with slightly different dollar values. Phase 1 is $100K for 1 year. Phase 2 is $750K for 2 years. So a little bit less money, but you have that partner to kind of help you out. So those are kind of the two programs I want to kind of give you the context for. We have 2 gentlemen here that have made excellent use of them in the past to grow their companies, and they kind of can tell that story much better than I can. So the way Vermont EPSCoR fits into this is for people that are interested in applying for those SBIR STTR programs, we offer what we call a phase 0. And that's a $15,000 seed grant to kind of help you collect that initial data that agencies like to see in those applications. So if you have this idea and you kind of need a proof of concept or to collect some data to help strengthen that proposal at the federal level, you can apply for the EPSCoR money and help collect that data and make that proposal that much stronger. So that's kind of where we fit in. So next, I think I'll have Cairn, who is co-founder of FreshTracks, talk about venture capital and kind of how that can interplay with this SBR, our money.
So that means we go from talking about SBR and SCTR to me, and then back to
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
all right, great. I just wanted to make sure. So I'm Cairn, and I'm the co-founder and one of the managing directors of FreshTracks Capital, and we've been in business for about 14 years. We have over time raised 3 different funds totaling about $36 million, primarily to invest in Vermont companies, although not exclusively. And we tend to invest in businesses, particularly out of this third fund, we tend to invest in businesses that have some tech focus or tech capacity or tech enablement. Without technology, the business wouldn't exist. Basically, one of the questions that I was asked by the organizers here was to whether or not any of our companies had received SBI or STTR money, and to my knowledge, actually, that the answer is no. Although we certainly have had some companies that have received other types of funding through some sort of competitive process. Most recently, this past week, our company Faraday received a $1 million Sunshot Grant Award from the Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy. That was a competitive process, and they had to then negotiate what the terms of that were going to be once they were awarded that. So, using that as an example or as a proxy for SBIR and STTR, from our perspective, that's awards like that are great. They're non-dilutive capital, meaning that it's not affecting our ownership position. In fact, to some extent, it's enhancing it, so that we're fine with that. To the extent that the terms of the grant and the operations necessary by the business to fulfill those grants would be normally done and funded by stockholders, then that's an extra bonus. So it allows the company to continue down the path that they were on and prove out some of the novel activities that they're doing. Those are all fascinating things. So we do encourage our companies to look into that whenever applicable. I think there's a flip side or a counter argument to that, which is making sure from our perspective where speed to market has some importance, and the ability to kind of continuously innovate or pivot a company as necessary. The flip side argument might be, are there any is there any bureaucracy around any of these grant awards that set a company on a path, sometimes for many months or many years, which disalign it with an emerging market or with changes that are happening, which from our perspective, could be a problem. So I think that's something that we would always monitor. The other thing I'll just mention, because it's not quite on topic, but I think it's important in the scheme of things, is that there's an increasing interest in America and also in Vermont in I guess I would call them business plan competitions or pitch competitions or things like this. So at the Hollywood end of the spectrum, that's things like Shark Tank. At the local end of the spectrum here, that's the Launch VT business plan competition. And I think we're seeing an increasing number of companies that want to, and actually we think should, participate in those types of events and venues as a way for them to hone their idea and their pitch and develop a concept, and also as a way maybe to get some early money if they would win the competition. Some of that money's pretty significant. The Launch VT business plan competition, I think this past year, was a winner-take-all $30,000 cash prize and package of in-kind services, legal and accounting and things like that, that totaled about $65,000. And the Iris VR team won that. They're exhibiting their Oculus Rift headset as it applies to architectural projects upstairs. They have a booth, so that has turned into a real company with real employees, and that money was meaningful and useful. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure there'll be questions or thoughts. So.
Thanks, Cairn. So I think next we'll go to, this is kind of just a random choice, but we'll go alphabetical by last name. So we'll go with Steve Arms next. And he was founded Microstrain a number of years back and since been bought by Lord, and you can see them exhibiting upstairs. And he's now on to new adventures, but we brought him up here to kind of talk about how he's leveraged SBIR over the course of the years and other monies and how those kind of fit together.
Sure, thank you. I'm not sure, is this working? Or is this working? This is the one? Yeah. Let me just start out by saying we really love the SBIR program. I founded Microstrain in 1987, had a $50,000 phase one from the Department of Health and Human Services to build a strain sensor that is used in orthopedic research. So it's a fairly esoteric application. But having $50,000 to work on my business was a lot of money when I was a PhD candidate and essentially broke and riding my bike around town. So that was a great opportunity for me. We later went on to win more awards from Health and Human Services, from the National Science Foundation, from the DoD, both the Air Force and the Navy, and the Department of Energy. We leveraged the EPSCoR program. We got about roughly $60,000 in EPSCoR contracts, phase 0 SBIRs. And we leveraged that into roughly $6 million in SBIR funding over about a 20-year span. And the thing that we did is we didn't just write SBIR after SBIR application. It wasn't like that at all. In fact, our strategy was, you could call it surgical. So we knew what we wanted to develop, and we articulated it very well to the agencies that we were applying to. And so they basically funded us to do what we wanted to do anyway, which was great for us. It allowed us to generate money to develop our products and not have to give up equity to venture capitalists and retain our equity. And I was able to share equity with some key employees, but in return they agreed to stay with the company for a long period of time. So that really kind of guaranteed that my brain trust, if you will, would stick around. We would continue to work on these contracts, but we wouldn't have to give up equity and have people who maybe didn't understand our business and were just thinking about exiting in 7 years, to start telling us what to do. So, it was really a choice on my part of how I wanted to fund the company. But I don't want you to think that all the revenue that we brought in was SBIR. That's not the case at all. Because we were operating in a strategic way, we were developing products. And so we had people within the company that were marketing those products. We were attending trade shows. We were giving presentations at the trade shows. We had a booth. We had working product and demos that customers would come to our booth and get their hands on it and play with it, right? So we were doing that at the same time as we were working the SBIR pipeline. So really we used SBIR to keep doing the next thing while we were selling and bringing in revenues from the things we already had. Does that make sense? So what you don't want to be, at least I felt it was a mistake, would be to get a shotgun out and just blast away at all the different SBIR solicitations and then become kind of a contractor to the SBIR program and not have any product to show for it. So we felt it was very important, particularly at the end of a phase 2, to have a mature product that we could sell in the marketplace. And it worked. I mean, we were profitable. We never lost money. We were profitable over a 25-year span. And then when the company that acquired us basically loved it because we had 45 patents. All the R&D had been paid for by the DoD. And they make parts for helicopters, and we make helicopter parts smarter. So it was a good marriage. And that's basically our story. So I would encourage anyone who wants to hold on to their equity, has good ideas, to participate in the SBIR program. And there's lots of different links that you could go to. I wrote them down, but probably the simplest and easiest one is sbir.gov. Go to that link and poke around and look at the solicitations. And I think if I can do it, you all can do it.
Thanks, Steve. So finally, we have Jack Glaser, and he is co-founder of MBF Biosciences. And he's kind of SBIR royalty in a sense. They just recently received the Tibbetts Award, which is a national award for SBIR recipients. It's very prestigious, and we're happy to have him represent Vermont in that. And in that ceremony, he got to meet the president and all kinds of good stuff. So that was very exciting for us as a Vermont community. So he's going to kind of talk about his story and how he's leveraged SBIR funds and other monies to grow MBF.
Thank you. My story, in a way, is very similar to Steve's because we started in '87. I didn't realize we had the same birthday.
Cool, that's good.
And I will say that our story is very similar in that we leveraged SBIR money to develop products, and it was our entire path that we took was not to identify what grants we could apply for and then fund a project and then have that project end and look for another project. That's a recipe for disaster, a recipe for failure within a few years. And I want to, I guess, give it some anecdotes because I think it may help when you're looking for money via the SBIR program to know what it can do for you. So in 1989, I wrote my first SBIR. I was at the University of Vermont working as a lab technician and computer programmer and had a few ideas about making a product that would allow researchers all over the world to do work better than they were currently doing. So I was working at the job. I was working in my bedroom at night. Weekends, pretty much every hour that I wasn't sleeping, I was working on coding. And it was very challenging, so I didn't really have much of a life. Wrote the SBIR grant, and it allowed me to leave the university and dedicate my full attention and my full, all of my efforts to creating this product. And in looking back, it was the key to our success. You do need, when you're starting a business, you do need to focus, and you need to direct all of your attention, all of your energies, all of your creativity, all of your will to making the business succeed. And so for me, getting money via the SBIR program was the key to that original success. If I had tried to, and this is in hindsight, if I had tried to continue the path that I was on, I probably would never have gotten a product released. I would have probably faded out from exhaustion and not been successful. So our company started with me, my dad, hired another programmer via SBIR funds, and quickly we created a product because realizing that you can't depend on SBIR money to make a living, you had to have a product that generates revenue. So it was very focused on generating revenue from the beginning. And over time, we've used the SBIR program in a number of ways. I'm very gratified that this year, 2 of the Nobel Prize winners actually won the Nobel Prize using our software. So it's allowed us to take chances and work on high-risk projects that we probably couldn't have gotten venture capital money for. Because the market that we serve in the science industry is just too small to derive a lot of revenue from. However, with the SBIR program driving our R&D, takes a lot of the pressure off using sales revenues to also create new products. So what we've done is create products via SBIR money, have enough breathing room from their funding to actually get the product to market and then use the revenue from the sales of the products to generate further product developments, and some of our products are now 15 and 20 years old. This year, I was just told a few months ago that we are the #2 recipient of biomedical federal research grants in the state of Vermont. So there's the University of Vermont, and then there's us. And I think the real difference is we don't actually generate, in a sense, we don't generate research in the way that scientists do. We're generating products that we sell into the worldwide market for scientists all around the world. So I like to look at return on investment. The SBIR program has given us a substantial amount of money. I don't know how many million, but we figured out that we have about a 10-to-1 return on investment. So for every dollar we've gotten from the SBIR program, we've been able to turn around and generate 10 more dollars in product revenue. And we do sales internationally, so a lot of the sales that we do bring in revenue to the country. So I think, I look at the SBIR program as a win-win program, and we use the EPSCoR program as part of our strategic plan for generating new grants for the bigger phase 1 and phase 2 grants. Because what's the trend now in grant funding is you need to come with a lot of preliminary data. When you're creating a grant, it's not enough to say, I've got a good idea, and I think that idea will generate a product, and here's what I think the product will look like, and here's who can use it. That's not enough anymore. That was the case maybe 15, 20 years ago. Now you have to come and say, I've got a product idea, I've shown that I can at least make it work, and I've got enough data to make the grant reviewers feel that my phase 1 and phase 2 work will be successful. And for us to do that, the EPSCoR phase 0 has been a key.
Yeah.
Big fan of the program.
Yeah, that is spot on. And I'd like to add that the Phase 0 program should not be viewed as a way to pay for the grant writing process. That's not the way we did it. It doesn't sound like the way you do it. What we would do is we would ask ourselves critically, what's the essence of this idea that we need to overcome, the hurdle that has to be overcome to show that it's going to work. And so we would use the Phase 0 money to run a critical experiment on that essence of that idea. And then once we had figured that out and we could demonstrate that repeatably, we'd put that in the grant application. And you have so much momentum at that point, the grant almost writes itself, because you know what you need to do next. You've got the data that you need, and you're inspired, and it just flows. And the grant agencies love it because they see that you were thinking critically, and you ran the tests that needed to be run, and so you have a jump on the competition. So I highly recommend that what you have to do is kind of look in the mirror and ask yourself, what do I need to do to prove it to myself, to really believe that this is going to work? And you don't have to do everything, but you have to do the thing that's really important.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we have kind of a small, intimate crowd, so I want to be able to take some questions. But while you're thinking of those, I have a couple for the panel. I'll use my moderator stick and take priority on that. But keep your questions ready, and I'll be asking in a second. So one thing I wanted to kind of go to everyone and ask, so you're kind of talking about two, major ways of receiving funding, venture capital and SBIR. What if you could maybe give one advantage to the route you took and one big hurdle to the route you took? Was it the right choice, and how did those advantages, disadvantages play out?
You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so I think Steve touched on it before. For me, the advantage of using SBIR funds was that we were able to retain full ownership of our company. And I also feel that we were allowed to find our own pace and our own way in the market. We weren't driven by our venture capital funders to hit certain product targets and certain deadlines, which may have been in place really to satisfy the investors rather than to satisfy the market. And I say that because I have a few friends who also have started businesses and had venture capital funding, and some of them became very successful. And so I'll turn it around by that, because my friends who were very successful, what they were able to do was to tap into a much larger source of funding than we were able to, and were then able to really attack a problem with a lot of resources. So a lot of technology, a lot of developers. One thing that the SBIR program doesn't give you is funds for marketing and for developing a sales team. The venture capital route, in a sense, it's more holistic, because the funds are there for developing the product, for creating marketing plans, and developing a sales and distribution plan. And so that was, for me, that was a big thing that I had to learn. After I developed the product, it was, how do you sell it? And you know, we had some ideas, so we weren't going into the marketplace with like, oh my God, I've got a mousetrap. How do I sell it? We were working our way towards it. Though I think if we had gotten venture capital money, it would have been part of our strategy from the beginning, and we would have been developing the internal structure within our company to be more successful more quickly. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think it's spot on again. But I have done some work. Besides getting SIBRs, people call them SIBRs instead of SBIR, so if you ever hear that. So not just SIBRs, one of the things you want to do is raise money in every kind of way you can, and that means selling product, but it also means often, if you're a tech company, doing contract work for other companies. So you got to be able to ask for the money, meaning you don't do the work for free. You don't deliver product to somebody and not get paid. You say, look, I need an advance. I need 50% up front. We're going to deliver on milestones. If we succeed at these milestones, you can pay us as we go. So we minimize risk for our customer, but we also minimize risk for ourselves. I mean, if it's a particularly difficult project, we need to hit certain milestones to show that it's going to work great for everybody, and that worked very well for us. So not only were we winning SIBRs, but we were winning contracts to take our technology and adapt it to specific applications. In one instance, I worked for a company that had been funded by a group of doctors. And I asked them straight up, why aren't we going for SIBRs on this? Why aren't we raising? We could probably go straight to a phase 2 with this. And it was an interesting technology that measured the depth of anesthesia. And they were reluctant because they were afraid that they would lose intellectual property rights to the government. And the way that works, or what can happen, is the government can retain rights to build the technology themselves if they need it. So if you invent something in the process of working on an SBIR and you file a patent on it while you're working on the SBIR, you have to state it's required, in the application that was funded in part or wholly by the United States government. And then when the patent's printed, it'll say the United States government has certain rights in this patent. And that makes it can make investors uncomfortable because they want all the rights. So the way we would deal with that going forward was we'd file patents first, and then we would write the application to the government. So our patents were already in place before we even asked for the money. But sometimes that isn't enough because if you work for 2 years on a program, phase 1 is 6 months and the phase 2 is 2 years. Things come up that you learn that need to be filed on. So even within our portfolio, there are several patents which the government has certain rights in. Because we were required to do that. So I don't know, maybe Cairn Cross would have some comments about that, but protecting intellectual property is a barrier for certain people who look at the SBIR program with some skepticism.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to make it clear, if it sounded like I was skeptical about the SBI program, I'm not, so.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
Yeah. I think Jack hit the nail on the head on a couple of things. There are two, there's pluses and minuses of both, and I think The plus from a venture point of view is certainly that SBIR programs and the grants and the agencies that are working with them are going to be limited to a certain subset of business, and there may be plenty of ideas with intellectual property capacity that don't fall within those frameworks, right? So I think that in the case of both of the other panelists here, their interests and their expertise align very nicely with SBIR and STTR, but there's a whole range of businesses that don't, and that's where other funding might be, certainly might be of interest or be necessary. I think the other thing is that increasingly in the venture world, there is venture is broken down into very, very early stage, which is called seed stage, which is kind of similar to R&D, and maybe more closely similar to some of the work done under the grant programs. And increasingly in the venture world, that money has gotten directed towards projects that are quite consumer-facing in a lot of ways, and in which speed to market is extremely important, and in which the technology might be less protectable and less easy to protect. So I think you're seeing that trend, and then I think there's also a subset of venture capital that is very much an acceleration to what Jack pointed out. It's an acceleration of an existing protected idea, which may be patentable or have a patent on it, and it's money that's used really for marketing and so forth. So for the most part, venture doesn't like R&D and science projects, very broadly speaking. And so therefore the industry is kind of split into this acceleration capital, a little later stage capital, and this very early seed stage capital, but utilized not really as much for R&D, but for kind of quick speed to market in certain applications. Now, like anything in the world, there's exceptions to that, and there's a lot of exceptions to that. And so finding the right, there are plenty of firms that have very, very narrow specialties. So there are some firms that, for instance, would only look at medical devices. It's all they fund and all they do. And there are other firms that do, life science work, and there are, others that do kind of R&D on, or would fund R&D on, projects that might have a military application or so forth. So there are exceptions, and they're very, very specialized. So the key there, really, from an entrepreneurial point of view, is that just like with the grants, where you're trying to figure out what do you do that dovetails nicely with what an agency wants to fund and tailoring that grant, the same thing would be true in approaching venture capital. What's going to be the right firm? Because not all venture capital is interested in all ideas. It's become very segmented and split up. So I guess that's what I would say. Was I supposed to say a drawback?
Sure, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So certainly the drawback's been touched on a little bit, which is that venture capital is the sale of equity interest in your company, and that suddenly means that you have somebody other than you in your business, and that for some people can be a problem or a challenge. On the other hand, there's certainly plenty of examples of serial entrepreneurs that have used that route kind of over and over again, quite successfully, that have been able to operate and incorporate venture into the way they kind of grow their business. So I think it really depends on the individual, depends on your own interests. And I know we spend a lot of time when we're looking at companies and getting to know entrepreneurs as part of a diligence process. We spend a lot of time trying to figure out, is this going to be a compatible relationship? Because it's a little bit like a marriage. It's going to last for hopefully quite a long period of time, and There's going to be certain expectations on both sides, and there's going to be bumps in the roads and things that come up. So it's really important to get those aligned fairly well right at the beginning.
Thanks. Any question? Oh, go ahead.
Actually, there are some other mechanical issues that can be a problem for SBIR applicants. One is you write the darn proposal, and it's a lot of work. I mean, I can write a phase one in like probably 2 days, but most people it takes like a week. I don't know how long it takes you, but
Month.
but then you do all this work to get the proposal submitted, and then you gotta wait because the time between when you submit and when you actually find out whether they liked it or not, and then the money, it could be 6 months plus. So that is kind of a bummer. You want to know right away, but you don't get to know right away. Then you do your phase one, and that 6 months goes by. You submit your final report. Then you got to wait again. You have to submit a phase two proposal, and you got to wait for them to decide whether they're going to fund that. So now you have a gap in your funding yet again, and if that's the only source of income that you have, it creates a hardship for the business. That's why it's so important to have product that you can sell and have some other form of revenue or something to support you so that you can keep the lights on and pay people. So that's one of the challenges. There are some agencies that provide that address that, and one that's really good is actually the Department of Defense. One of the things I really like about the Department of Defense SBIR is that when you finish your phase one, they actually tell you, they invite you to make a phase two submission. You see what I mean? Whereas the other agencies don't give you that invitation. At least they didn't when I was involved in these programs. So like with NSF and the Department of Health and Human Services and the DOE, you gotta really do a lot of work to pull together a big $800,000 or $1 million proposal for a 2-year period for them with no idea whether they're gonna fund that phase two. Whereas the Department of Defense, they invite you to submit a phase two, and so you know the effort that you're putting into that phase two is worthwhile because they want to fund you. Does that make sense? So I really appreciated that about our Navy and Air Force contracts. The other thing I'd like to add is, a lot of people feel like, there's nothing that they're asking for that I can actually address because our technology doesn't fit into the solicitation exactly. And I'd like to address that because what we found is the National Science Foundation, for example, has very broad requests. So the National Science Foundation will go out and say, we want safer and more efficient transportation systems. I mean, wow, that's a very broad area. And I'm just using that as an example. How about, more efficient use of water, cleaner water for the world's supply of water? Just really broad topics that could be addressed in a myriad of ways. Whereas the Department of Defense might come out and ask for a very specific type of optical sensor to be used on a certain platform. So, you kind of need to understand what the DoD is asking for so that you can go after that. But to call those limitations is almost unfair. The government is using us as a resource to get research done. So they're going to ask for what they need. So we have to be able to, adapt.
Yeah, one of the things that I also wanted to touch base with is how the government adapts, because as Steve pointed out, and you made me remember my early days too, when I had to write our first grant, I didn't have time to write the phase two. For me, it took too much time. It took me, it takes you a week, it takes me maybe a month.
It's a big effort to do a phase two.
And it's a big effort. I didn't have the time. So I just focused on using all the resources that I had gotten from my phase one to get a product out, and then started generating revenue from that. And it really took me maybe another 5 years before I was ready to free up enough of my attention to write another grant.
So you didn't even write a phase two?
I didn't even do a phase two for the first one. But we've, after that, it dawned on me, it took me a while to get it through my thick skull, but how great a resource the government was to fund new projects, and that without at least having a strategy to include that funding in product development, it was, in my case, it was silly. So then I set my company up so that I did have enough time to work on creating new grants. And so, and I mentioned the government adapts too, because in the beginning, as Steve said, it's a lot of time, a lot of energy, and then you have to wait for your phase 2, which can totally derail you. The government now has created a program called the Fast Track. And with the Fast Track, you can apply for a phase 1 and a phase 2 at the same time. So you don't have to have that waiting period after you do your phase 1 and then you make a submission to phase 2. And I think that's actually, for us, we've gotten a few of those, and that has made a huge difference. I think that waiting period can totally derail a project and take all of, if you have people who are working on a particular project and their funds are being paid by SBIR money, then you can lose the person, and then you totally lose all the momentum in a project.
Thanks. Any questions from the audience? Sure, right here.
You have a venture on now?
I have a little LLC and I'm working on some app development at the moment. But I have about 3 or 4 ideas that I'm working on, kind of part-time. But since I sold the business, I left the company that bought us, and I'm really enjoying life right now.
I hear you're a good tennis player too.
I'm trying to become a good tennis player, but it's just fun, it's just fun not to have to sit in front of a computer for, 10, 12 hours every day, it's my previous life, or have to get on airplanes and fly all over the place and be told my flight's been delayed or canceled or whatever. So I have a nicer life now, but I am working on getting back in just because it's fun.
Have you funded anyone yet? Or are you looking to create something new yourself?
I'm creating something new, but I'm not by myself. I'm going to hire outside developers to help me with this particular project I'm working on. And but I'm not. I've decided not to start another business because I feel like I'll have more free time and able to focus on the marketing of the product if I hire developers that are good at that and do this kind of thing a lot. So it's kind of like, it's interesting because now I'm on the other side of the table. Like when I ran Microstrain and I had 60 employees, companies would come to us, Fortune 500 companies like Sikorsky or Johnson Johnson, whatever. They would ask us to do things for them, and it was interesting and fun. And they knew that we had the expertise to do it, so that was great. And they had money, and they had something they needed. They knew what they wanted. Now I have money because I cashed out my business, and I know what I want, but I want to hire the expertise to do it for me rather than start a company from scratch and have to build it up, because that is a big, big effort. So it's not that I'm lazy, it's just that I'm in a different position sort of financially. Does that make sense?
Good.
So I know we're here to talk about money, but I wanted to ask about something kind of related, which is expertise and advice. And so with SBIR process, I gather that you get some money, but you don't exactly get any hand-holding, you don't get any access, you don't get any advice, you don't get someone sitting on your board, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm kind of sitting here presuming that you guys had great ideas, you had some business acumen, and you were ready to take the bull by the horns and just go forward with your businesses, just what you were doing, et cetera, et cetera. You didn't need advice. And so I'm curious, I guess this is really a question for you, Cairn, about the role that you play on advising the companies that you fund. You mentioned that giving up the equity stake as a downside, and I thought that was interesting because I've always imagined that the equity stake you give up to a VC comes in exchange for some amount of expertise, perhaps access, perhaps some amount of them acting in an advisory capacity for your business, and that brings some value. And let's face it, not every idea person is a great business person. And so I'm just curious if you guys have a take on that, both you two from the standpoint of, did you know exactly what you were doing in the early stages, and did you just feel like you didn't need help from a VC? And Cairn, on your side, I guess the question is, for the companies you fund, to what extent do you get involved? And do these folks always have a strong sense of business acumen?
So for the people in back and online, the question was about the support mechanisms for each of these different kind of funding mechanisms. So Cairn?
There's a lot of nuance to my answer, so I'll try to make there's not a black and white response. So I think the answer in terms of, so I'll speak about my firm and then I'll speak about the industry in general, right? Actually, I'll do the reverse. I'll speak about the industry in general. I'll speak about my firm. So there's been some interesting studies done by academics in which they ask the same questions of funded entrepreneurs, and then they ask the similar or flip side question to venture firms. And one of the questions that they typically ask is, what's the value that you get for the money? And the venture firms that answer that question, the industry answers that question by saying, oh, it's really not about the money, it's about all the great stuff that we do for businesses. And then if you look at the answers from entrepreneurs, you see the exact opposite response, right? The entrepreneurs, for the most part, say it's really all about the money. I don't give a shit about the pardon my French, about the advice and expertise, right? So there's a disconnect there, at least in the studies that I've read, I find really fascinating, right? So I think the answer lies somewhere in between. So what I'll say is that, and actually I'll speak about not our firm necessarily, but me as an individual partner, because I think that's a really important piece to this. I think firms have a culture, but each individual partner has an approach. And so my partners will accuse me of looking at every company that we fund or everything that I'm involved with as a lead partner as a bit of a sociology experiment, right? Which that's, in their mind, that's not a good thing. In my mind, that is a good thing, right? And so the nuance to my answer is it depends, and it depends really on what the entrepreneur wants from me. And on one end of the spectrum, an entrepreneur might literally want very granular hand-holding. So I have one company in which I have a standing, weekly phone call with them, no matter what, and it gives them a venue to ask me some, pretty basic questions that. Business strategy kinds of questions, sometimes just questions about, kind of silly things that are, probably somebody else could answer just as well as I could, what our bank account should look like, or, what should we be doing this versus this, or should we use an outside payroll processing company, stuff like that, which is probably not that valuable. But they seem to like that venue. And on the other end of the spectrum, I'm essentially practicing psychology without a license because I have entrepreneurs that what they really want me to do, and if you've followed the recent Ello story, which is a whole fascinating thing I could talk about for hours, I think Paul Budnitz was quoted as saying something about, well, I'm a really cool guy because I'll ride over to his house on my motorcycle and deliver my homemade beer to him and just kind of let him vent and just talk. And basically that's what I do. I go, and nod a lot and say, well, how do you feel about that? And, stuff like that. That's right out of basic therapy training. And then I ride away. And he seems to get something out of that. So that's good, right? So I think there's a lot of balance in all of this. I suspect, and so I'd like to take your question and actually ask these guys. I suspect that just knowing these guys and having interacted with them a bit over the years, that each of these folks probably has figured out some places to go and people that they trust, but in general, they firmly believe that they know the right thing, for the most part. And that they know better how to do this than anybody else, right? I know Steve does. I don't know if Jackson does. Right?
No, actually, I'd like to respond by saying, when I started the business, I didn't know what I didn't know. You know how people say, well, you got to know what you know and know what you don't know? I didn't know what I didn't know. What I knew was how to write grants because I had worked as a PhD candidate at the University of Vermont, had read grant proposals, had helped prepare them, and so the university taught me how to write grants. And that was my training. So writing grants was not a big deal to me. But marketing a product, spending money on advertising, that was something I didn't feel comfortable with at all. I mean, a full-page ad in Sensors Magazine, it was like, at that time, we're talking like 20 years ago, that was like $5,000 for a one-time shot in the magazine. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So I would take out these little black and white ads, you know, and I was cheap with marketing. And eventually, a marketing professional came into my life and introduced himself, a guy from Providence, Rhode Island, and he said, Steve, at this stage in your business, you need to really do a lot more with your marketing effort. You're going to need to spend some money. You know, you need regular, full color, full page ads in the right magazines, and it's going to cost you money, but you're going to need to do it, and your products will, you know, benefit, your sales will benefit if you spend more money on marketing. And he was right. And we took the risk, we invested in marketing, we followed his advice, and it really, really helped. So I think as a technology guy and, you know, an engineer, it's easy to underestimate the value of good marketing. And it is expensive. It's really tough. And the SBR program won't pay for it. So I asked the question, you know, how are you going to pay for it? We were kind of fortunate because at the time we were a little bit more mature. I mean, look, 25 years it took me to grow the company to the point where I could exit. That's way too long from a venture capital perspective, I think. Most venture capitalists look at a company as a box. They put money in. The box has a duration of maybe 7 years. Then money. They want money out, like
More money.
10 times what they put in, hopefully. So, you know, I had to be it took me a long time, mostly because I didn't understand marketing. I didn't put enough into it. I didn't have enough resources, financial resources, to really do it right. And it took me quite some time. It wasn't until like the internet kind of took off. So I'm thinking like 90-something, in the 90s. So I founded the company in 87, but it wasn't until like the mid-90s that the company really started taking off, and I had the resources to market it. The internet was great because it flattened the playing field a lot. So just because you have a website, all of a sudden people can find you. So that's a beautiful thing. But I'd be curious to know if you had a similar experience, because I think you came out of the university, you wrote proposals. We faced similar challenges, but you were able to get your product out in front of enough people to where you had a sustainable business. So did you go out and find marketing people, or did they find you, or what happened?
Yeah, for me it was I needed to find the people, and then I needed to find the right people. And there's a lot of people who want to offer you advice, and my recommendation is you just have to be open and use your own discrimination and identify what advice is going to be right for you. Nobody's going to tell you, here's how to run your business and make $1 million. That's something you have to work on yourself. I do want to also state that I'm a big believer in the SBIR program, and one of the things that is great about it is they actually have, if you win a grant, they have services that will help you if you are new to business. They will help you develop a business plan, and it's free. So once you get the grant, you can be part of this program. That you develop a business plan. They'll do marketing studies for you. They'll help you figure out your market niche, and there's a lot of support once you get the grant. The hurdle is to get the money, and I do think the government recognizes we're not just going to give people money, especially SBIR people, because the government's goal is to make you succeed in a business way. It's not to fund money and fund projects and have them die. So there is a lot of advice that's out there.
Yeah. In fact, with the Navy, we had a really good program manager, very hands-on, and we would go to Patuxent River, Maryland, and meet with them, and they'd tell us what their needs were. They would share sensitive documents with us, like drawings that are proprietary to the government, sensitive. Of course, we have to keep them secret, but we use those to refine our product ideas and to develop tests that were appropriate. So we felt like we got a lot of help, even in phase one, particularly with the DoD. So yeah, if you do win one of these awards, you want to make the most of it. And that means getting to know them and meeting with them face to face, talking with them.
Thanks, guys. Well, that kind of spot.
There's at least another question out there, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one more quick one? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a question for Steve and Jack. I'm curious, both of you guys moved to product pretty quickly, it sounds like. What demand validation did you do in the very early stage? How did you know you were building something that had a real market?
Yeah, for me, I started the business really as a hobby. And when it was, again, I was doing a lot of it part-time. And at some point, I realized there were people who wanted this product. And I made some rough calculations. I thought I might be able to sell 100 of them. And so to me, that was the validation that I had. I didn't go out and do a market study. I spoke to a few researchers. And what happened was, it was the chicken and the egg. More people were interested in this product than I knew because the product didn't exist. And so I had enough sense to know that there were enough people to make it worth my while to develop the product. Then it kind of took off, and the whole technology thing, you know, if you build a better mousetrap, people eventually want it if you advertise it. And and you know, I think that as a small business, as an entrepreneur, you often go by your gut, and there's a lot of gut. There's not a lot of like hardcore study that for me that went into my business.
And I think the other thing that's important is market exposure. I mean, just because you think you have a good product and good idea, sometimes one can develop kind of a white elephant. You know, a product that has all these bells and whistles. You hold it back from the marketplace for too long, and you invest in the development so far without getting feedback from users, from customers. So it's really important to get early feedback from customers so that you can, tune the product to the marketplace. The other thing that happened for me, because I was a grad student, I had to, present the results of the work that I was doing when I was at the university. So I'd give presentations, and after the talk, people would say, "Where'd you buy those sensors?" I'm like, "I made them." And so, "Oh, will you make them for us?" So I knew that people wanted them, and I could make them. I could make them. I could ship them wherever people want them. So I was doing that anyway, without the SBIR program. But I used the SBIR program to take that product to the next level, a higher level. And then the product was based on magnetic sensors. So I had an ad in the Thomas Register, but probably nobody knows anything what the Thomas Register is anymore. The Thomas Register before the internet was where people looked. Buyers, where purchasing agents look to buy things. And I had a little ad in there, it wasn't very expensive, that marketed the fact that we used Hall effect sensors, which is a type of magnetic sensor, a kind of magnetometer. And I got a call from the Optic Electronic Corp in Dallas, and they said, "We want you to develop a solid state compass. Do you think you can do that?" And I was like, "Sure, I can do that." In fact, I actually didn't know yet exactly how to do it. But I figured I could figure it out, and I did. And now, if you're interested, you can go upstairs and you can see these products that Microstrain manufactures, which are very sophisticated navigation devices the size of a domino. So the initial work was to enhance a set of night vision goggles to put a compass in them. So when you look around in night vision, you could see a compass rose moving around as you moved your head around. And it was pretty neat. They came back to us, again, that company, and asked us to do some other work for them, like for a laser rangefinder as well. And then I wrote a phase 2 to enhance the product with gyroscopes. So we had magnetometers and accelerometers and gyros to help to reanimate paralyzed limbs. Okay, so we worked with Case Western Reserve University. The idea was that people who are paralyzed you could stimulate their muscles so that they could take a few steps, out of a wheelchair and be able to walk. And we got a phase 2. It really advanced the technology, but there's no market in reanimating paralyzed limbs. But there is a market in unmanned systems, like various kinds of robots. And so now Microstrain builds a lot of navigation devices, based on something that happened in 1987. You know what I mean? So you just keep building on what you know, and you trust your judgment. And if you see a good opportunity and someone wants to fund you and it fits your strategy, then do it.
Well, thanks, guys. It's time's up,
There
unfortunately.
really was one.
One more? Okay. If you guys want to stick around, I am. Go ahead.
This actually is not a question, but I just came back from an SBIR STTR meeting this week. That this is the annual meeting that NIH organized for SBIR STTR. And again, I'm in the point that I want to learn more about these grants, and I didn't know much, so I decided to go. And it was really, really useful for me. You learn how to write the grants and what they're looking for, and I was able to meet a lot of people from, in this case, it's the National Institute of Health, and you really need the people one-to-one. And like Jack said, they really wanted to support the research. This is the only budget that is still increasing. Congress is very interested. And one of the other things that I've been involved in, and for you, Ian, you probably know that Vermont is one of the IDEA states. Basically, it's one state that received less money than the average of the states in money from federal money from the National Institute of Health. And there are many states. We are like, I think, 25. And one thing that they realized is that there were not many applications from SBIR and STTR within these states. So NIH is very interested in trying to increase the applications from these states. And we have a workshop in August, and I was one of the co-chair, in finding where are the limiting factors, why there are not too many applications on SBIR and STTR within all these IDEA states. And I have to say, it was interesting to have a graph in applications, and among the IDEA states, the state that had more application, you're not going to believe it, but it was Kentucky. And I said, come on, we can compete with Kentucky. Kentucky, the graph was like this, New Hampshire like this, Vermont like this. And maybe most of the SBIR were coming from you guys. So definitely we are not here. And so as a NIH, the National Institute of Health, and I think all the other organizations, they're trying to find out why. Because the money is coming from the Congress, and again, the Congress is not just a few states, it's all. So they want to increase. So we come out with a few things that they want to try to actually implement to help the number of applications. Because the good thing is that the success rate, it was actually the same. These states, like Massachusetts, California, with non-IDEA states are about the same. So meaning we are not less smart than all the others. It's just that there are not enough applications. So they're really trying to encourage the number of applications. And I think so they will be really pleased if there are more and more applications coming from here. And the other thing that I found out, they have a new program now from the SBIR that's called Direct to Phase 2, which is independent from the fast track, and is if you already had done some feasibility work, you go directly to this. And I think the rate of success is relatively new, but it seems like the rate of success is relatively good. But I think, again, coming from Vermont, it can be competitive, and it's just encourage people to apply for this grant because there are not many. And I think federal money, and we are talking about NIH, but I think the DOD and every other agency is probably very supportive because Congress is not just a few states, it's everyone. So
Most definitely, thanks. Anyone else? So actually that's a great note to end on because we have some workshops coming up in early November. There's some flyers up in these front couple chairs, so feel free to pick them up and sign up for those. There's also a little pen and a piece of paper if you want to sign up to get emails from Vermont EBSCOR about funding opportunities. We invite you to do that. And thanks for coming, and thanks to the panelists. It was a very great conversation.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. Thank you.